My husband stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, carving knife in hand, and announced to his entire family that he'd invited his college girlfriend to spend Christmas with us. "She's going through a hard time," he said, not even looking at me. "I told her she could stay in the guest room. It's what family does." He said it the same way he'd say "pass the gravy," like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. Like 14 years of marriage gave him the right to make that decision for both of us without a single conversation. I smiled, set down my fork, and said nothing. His mother nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. His sister refilled her wine. Our daughter, who was 9 and sitting right beside me, reached under the table and found my hand. That was the moment I knew. Not just that the marriage was over. That had been a slow death I'd been watching for years. No, that was the moment I knew I was done performing the role he'd written for me. His name was Daniel. Mine is Renee. And for 14 years, I had been the invisible architecture of a life he took full credit for. We met in our mid-20s at a financial planning firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was a junior analyst, and he was the kind of man who filled a room with his voice. Confident, charming, the sort of person who made everything look effortless because he was smart enough to surround himself with people who did the actual work. I was one of those people. And then I became his wife. I left my position at the firm after our daughter Sophie was born. Daniel made it sound like a gift he was giving me. "You don't have to work, Renee. I've got us covered." What he didn't mention, what I didn't fully understand until years later, was that the coverage came almost entirely from the real estate portfolio I had built from a $40,000 inheritance my grandmother left me. I parlayed it into 4 rental properties across the Carolinas over the course of a decade, quietly, methodically, while Daniel networked at golf courses and took client lunches he'd expensed to our joint account. The properties were in my name. The LLC I'd formed to hold them was in my name. The business credit card tied to that LLC, in my name. Daniel knew this in theory. In practice, he'd long since convinced himself that everything was ours, meaning his, meaning something he was vaguely owed for being the face of our household. Back to Thanksgiving. After dinner, after Daniel's family had gone home and Sophie was in bed, I sat in our kitchen with a glass of water and waited for him to bring it up. To apologize, to at least acknowledge that announcing a house guest, an ex-girlfriend house guest, over turkey and green bean casserole was not normal behavior. He came downstairs in his socks and poured himself a bourbon. "I figured you'd understand," he said, opening his phone. "Carla's divorce is getting ugly. She doesn't have anywhere to go for the holidays." "You didn't ask me," I said. "I knew you'd say yes," he shrugged. "You always say yes." And he walked back upstairs. I sat with that for a long time. You always say yes. He wasn't wrong. I had been saying yes for so long that it had stopped meaning anything. Yes to moving to his preferred neighborhood. Yes to joining his mother's church. Yes to attending 17 years of his college friends' lake weekends where I made conversation and organized carpools and remembered birthdays while Daniel held court at the fire pit. Yes to absorbing, quietly, every dismissal and assumption and small humiliation that had accumulated like water damage, invisible until suddenly you're looking at rot. I went to bed that night and did not sleep. I want to be clear about something because I've seen the version of this story where the woman is a saint and the husband is a cartoon villain, and that's not what this is. Daniel wasn't a monster. He was something harder to explain. A man who had arranged his entire interior life around the belief that he deserved the good things that happened to him, and that the people who made those things happen were simply doing what came naturally. He didn't think he was using me. He thought we had an understanding. The understanding, as it turned out, was mine alone. I spent the next 3 weeks doing something I should have done years earlier. I read every document I had signed or filed or managed over the course of our marriage with the focused attention of someone preparing for a deposition. I already knew the broad strokes, the properties, the LLC, the accounts. What I hadn't fully mapped was the degree to which Daniel's professional life had been subsidized by mine. The consulting work he transitioned into after leaving the firm 5 years ago operated through a business account I had co-signed. The lease on his downtown office was backed by a personal guarantee I had provided. Two of his largest clients, a regional home builder and a commercial property developer, had been referred to him through my professional network, relationships I'd built during my years at the firm and maintained carefully over time. He'd never acknowledged this. I'd never pushed him to. We were married. I thought that meant something. By the first week of December, I had a clear picture. I made an appointment with a family law attorney named Patricia Holloway, whose name I'd gotten from a colleague who'd been through her own divorce 2 years prior. I did not tell Daniel I was going. I told him I had a dentist appointment. Patricia's office was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, with a view of the skyline that felt almost aggressive in its clarity on a cold December morning. She listened to everything I told her: the property structure, the business accounts, the co-signatures, the years of financial management Daniel had happily outsourced to me, and then she set down her pen. "He's been operating on credit you established and assets you own," she said. "Yes." "And he's aware of this?" "He's aware of the facts," I said. "Whether he's processed what they mean is another question." Patricia almost smiled. "How quickly do you want to move?" "Before Christmas," I said, "before she gets here." Carla arrived on December 22nd in a white SUV with Texas plates and 2 large suitcases. She was pretty in the way that women are when they've been told they're pretty their whole lives, a certain ease in her own skin, a habit of assuming welcome. She came in and immediately said the guest room was adorable, which was a word I'd never used to describe a room I'd painted and furnished myself, but fine. Daniel gave her a hug that lasted 3 seconds too long. Sophie stood in the hallway in her pajamas and looked at me with an expression I recognized. The one she made when she was working something out that she couldn't quite put into words yet. "Is she staying in the blue room?" Sophie asked me later, when I was tucking her in. "For a little while." "Why?" "Because Daddy invited her." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Did you want her to come?" I smoothed the blanket over her shoulders. "I want you to get some sleep, Bug." She looked at me steadily. 9 years old, and already she could see the shape of a thing without being told what it was. "Mama," she said, "you look tired." "I'm okay." "You don't look okay." I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. That night, while Daniel and Carla watched a movie downstairs, something I could hear faintly through the floorboards, her laughter rising and falling like a tide, I sat at the desk in our bedroom with my laptop and began making phone calls. Patricia had filed the initial separation paperwork that morning. By midnight, I'd initiated the transfer of the rental property management to my sole LLC account, changed the administrative passwords on every financial platform I controlled, and contacted our accountant, a woman named Donna who had been doing our taxes for 6 years, to let her know I would be retaining her services going forward and that Daniel would need to find separate representation. Donna's response came back in 11 minutes. "Understood. Call me tomorrow. I've been waiting for this." I did not know what to make of that, exactly, but it steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. On Christmas Eve, I came downstairs at 7 in the morning to find Carla at my kitchen island in a silk robe that did not belong to her, using my French press, reading something on her phone. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a smile that was either completely innocent or a very skilled performance of innocence. "Morning," she said. "Hope you don't mind. Daniel said you guys always have coffee ready early." I opened the cabinet, got myself a mug, and poured what remained in the press. "Where is he?" I asked. "Still asleep." She tucked her hair behind her ear. "He mentioned you've been stressed lately. Work stuff?" I looked at her. "Something like that." Sophie came downstairs 20 minutes later and sat beside me at the counter, pressing her knee against mine in that way she had. Not quite a hug, just contact, warmth, the small, specific gravity of a child who wants you to know she's there. Carla tried to engage her about Christmas presents. Sophie answered in polite single syllables and ate her cereal without looking up. At 10 o'clock, Daniel came downstairs, poured coffee, and kissed Carla on the cheek. Not me. Her. In my kitchen, in front of my daughter, on Christmas Eve. I excused myself quietly, went upstairs, finished packing the bag I'd started 3 days earlier, and sent a text to my sister Claire, who lived 40 minutes away in Concord. We're coming. Don't ask questions yet. I came back downstairs with the bag over my shoulder and my keys in my hand. Daniel was explaining something to Carla about the neighborhood's holiday lights tour. He looked up when he heard me on the stairs and his expression shifted. Not guilt, exactly. More like irritation at being interrupted. Where are you going? Sophie and I are going to Claire's for Christmas. What? He set down his mug. Renee, we have plans. You have plans? I said. I made different ones. You can't just... He stopped, recalibrated, put on the voice he used when he was managing a situation. Come on, it's Christmas. Don't make this into something. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about 14 years, about the Thanksgiving table, about the 3 seconds too long, about the silk robe in my kitchen and my daughter pressing her knee against mine because she could feel something I hadn't named yet, but she already understood. Sophie, I said, get your coat. She was off the bar stool before I finished the sentence. We drove to Claire's in a light snow. Sophie held my hand across the console the whole way and neither of us said very much. She fell asleep against the window somewhere on the highway, her breath fogging the glass. And I drove in the quiet and let myself feel the specific weight of what I was leaving behind. Not the loss of the marriage. I'd been mourning that for a long time already. Something else. The version of myself who had gone along with things, who had said yes so many times she'd forgotten she had other options. That version was in the rearview mirror now. I called Patricia from Claire's driveway. Papers are ready for service, she said. I can have someone at his office on the 27th. Do it, I said. Renee, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Claire met us at the door in her pajamas with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and did not ask a single question. She just opened the door wider and stepped aside. That's the thing about a sister who knows you. She can read the whole story in the way you're standing. Sophie slept in the pull-out in Claire's sewing room and woke up on Christmas morning to a small pile of gifts Claire had quietly accumulated, because Claire had always been the kind of person who kept emergency presents for exactly this sort of occasion. We sat around a small tree and opened things and ate cinnamon rolls, and Sophie laughed when the dog unwrapped his own gift by mistake, and it was the most peaceful morning I'd spent in years. My phone rang 9 times that day. I did not pick up. On the 27th, a process server found Daniel at the Starbucks he went to every weekday morning, corner table, the one facing the window, 9:15 like clockwork. 3 years of Tuesday morning client calls at the same location. I had told Patricia exactly where he'd be. He called me 11 times before noon. I had already changed my number. The asset freeze hit his accounts the same morning. The business credit card was suspended by 10:15. The office lease guarantee, which I'd quietly removed my name from 2 weeks prior with Patricia's guidance, left Daniel personally exposed on a commercial space he couldn't independently afford. By 2 in the afternoon, Carla had texted Claire's number looking for me. Daniel must have given it to her, and Claire, bless her, responded with 3 words. She's not available. The next weeks were not clean or triumphant the way these stories sometimes get told. I'm going to be honest about that. There were nights at Claire's when Sophie had nightmares and couldn't tell me what she'd seen, just that she wanted to go home, and I had to sit with the specific pain of not being able to give her the home she meant. There were mornings when I sat at Claire's kitchen table with my coffee going cold and felt the full weight of what rebuilding actually required. Not the dramatic overnight inversion of power, but the slow, unglamorous work of constructing a life from the foundation up. I found us a rental house in February. 3 bedrooms, a yard with a dogwood tree that Sophie immediately claimed as hers, a kitchen with good afternoon light. We moved in on a Saturday with Claire's truck and a playlist Sophie made on my phone, and when we set up her bed in her new room, she lay down in the middle of it and stared at the ceiling and said, "It smells different here." Good different or bad different? She thought about it. Like it's going to be something, she said. I painted her room the color she picked, a deep teal that was bolder than I would have chosen, and when I finished and stepped back and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, like I was capable of making things exactly as they should be. The financial untangling took 8 months. Patricia was thorough and relentless, two qualities I would recommend in any attorney. The rental properties remained mine outright. There was no ambiguity there. The documentation was clean. The business assets were more complex. Daniel's attorney argued that the LLC had operated as a marital enterprise, that his labor and client relationships had contributed to its value. Patricia asked him to provide documentation of his contributions. He produced 3 years of email threads and some meeting notes. I produced 12 years of contracts, financial statements, vendor agreements, property management records, and a spreadsheet of every transaction I had personally executed, totaling just under $1.1 million in managed assets. His attorney stopped arguing about the LLC. Daniel was left with his professional reputation, such as it remained after 3 clients quietly transitioned away once the separation became known, and a Honda Accord that was in his name and his alone because he traded in a car we'd co-owned without telling me 2 years ago, and I'd let it go at the time because I was too tired to fight about it. It was the only thing that was purely his. I found that almost funny. Carla was back in Texas by March. Sophie heard this from Daniel during one of his increasingly sparse visits and reported it to me the way kids report news they sense is significant without fully knowing why. She went home, Sophie said, setting her backpack on the kitchen counter. I heard. Daddy seemed sad. He probably is, I said. Sophie was quiet for a moment, pulling out her homework folder. Are you sad? I thought about it honestly, about some things, not about this. She nodded like that made sense to her. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and opened her math book and asked me if I could help her with fractions, and I sat down beside her and did. I want to tell you about the letter I wrote Daniel because I think it's the part of this that I needed most and would have skipped if I hadn't forced myself to do it. It wasn't a letter in the emotional sense. No recrimination, no catalogue of grievances, no final dramatic declaration. It was 6 pages of financial documentation, a summary of every dollar I had contributed to his professional infrastructure over the course of our marriage. The lease guarantee, $340,000 in potential liability I had absorbed. The business credit line, $47,000 in charges I had co-signed for. The client referrals, which I valued conservatively based on the revenue they'd generated for his firm over 5 years, $218,000. The property portfolio, which I had grown from $40,000 to a current appraised value of $890,000 through 14 years of management, renovation decisions, tenant selection, and refinancing, all of which I had executed without his involvement or, frankly, his interest. The last paragraph was 2 sentences. The numbers above are not a bill, they are a record, so that at least one of us knows the full truth of what we built and who built it. I sent it certified mail to his apartment. He signed for it on a Tuesday. He never wrote back. I didn't expect him to. I hadn't written it for a response. I wrote it because I needed it to exist outside of my own head. A document, a record. Proof in the most literal sense that I had not imagined my own life. That the invisible work had been real, that I'd been real, even when he'd arranged things so carefully that I might forget it. It's spring now. The dogwood in the backyard is doing exactly what dogwoods do, and Sophie has informed me, with the authority of someone who has been waiting all winter for this, that it's the best tree she's ever had. My consulting practice has been open for 7 months. Several of the contacts I'd maintained quietly over the years have become clients. I am not rich, but I am solvent in a way that belongs entirely to me, which feels like a different kind of wealth. Some mornings I wake up early and make coffee before Sophie's alarm goes off, and I sit at the kitchen table in the good afternoon light. Even though it's morning, the light here is good all day, and I feel something I didn't have a word for at first. I kept reaching for words like relief or peace, and they weren't quite right. They were too passive for what it actually felt like. What it feels like is space. Room to be exactly who I am without needing to manage anyone else's perception of it. Without performing patience or gratitude or accommodation. Without saying yes when I mean no. or staying silent when silence cost me something. My silence, in the end, wasn't what he thought it was. He read it as compliance. He read it as weakness, as acceptance, as the steady hum of a woman who had arranged herself around him so completely that she no longer had edges of her own. He was wrong about that. The silence was where I was building. I've thought a lot about the moment Daniel said you always say yes, and the fact that he meant it as a compliment. That's what stays with me. He wasn't being cruel in that instant. He genuinely believed that my accommodation was a kind of contentment, that because I hadn't fought him, I must have agreed. That's the thing about a long, slow erosion. The person causing it rarely notices the damage because the surface stays so smooth. What I know now is that the life I was living had a cost I kept paying without ever submitting the invoice. Not because I didn't know the numbers. I knew them exactly. I knew what I'd built, and what I'd absorbed, and what I'd quietly redirected towards someone else's vision of himself. I just hadn't yet decided that I was allowed to stop. That decision, the moment I actually made it, didn't look the way I thought it would. There was no confrontation, no breaking point where I finally said everything I'd been holding. I just looked at my daughter pressing her knee against mine at that kitchen counter, and I understood that the most honest thing I could do for her and for myself was to stop pretending the arrangement was acceptable. People sometimes ask if I regret how I handled it. The silence, the methodical way I moved before he knew anything was in motion. I don't. Not because I'm proud of being strategic, but because I know why I did it that way. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. When you've spent years being the person who manages everything while someone else takes the credit, you learn something about how fragile that system is, and how quickly it collapses when the person holding it together simply stops. Daniel's professional life didn't fall apart because I was cruel. It fell apart because it had never actually been his. The clients, the credit, the lease, the referrals, those things existed because I had built or secured or sustained them. When I stopped doing that, what remained was what had always been there. A man very skilled at presenting the appearance of success without having constructed any of the underlying structure. That's not a comfortable thing to realize about someone you spent 14 years with. But it's a true thing, and I found that I'd rather live with a true thing than a comfortable lie. What I want Sophie to understand, what I hope she's already beginning to absorb, the way kids absorb things before they can articulate them, is that the most important things you'll ever build are the ones that are genuinely yours. The integrity to do the work, even when no one's watching, the clarity to understand what you've actually created and what you're owed, and the endurance to keep going when the ground shifts, when the life you planned becomes the life you're leaving, when the only path forward is the one you make yourself. Those three things, doing right even in private, knowing the truth of your own situation, and refusing to stop when it gets hard. Those are what got me from that Thanksgiving table to a kitchen with good afternoon light and a daughter who calls the dogwood tree hers. The signless was never the ending. It was the space where I figured out what came next.